Hey, how's it going? So I'm going to make a cooking video, right? I'm gonna make a pizza, and I've been making pizza most of my life, 50 some years, but I've never been really thrilled with my pizza. It's nice that it's easy to make, it's inexpensive, it's always there. You can put what you want on it and so on. But it's not the kind of pizza that I get excited about, like thinking, oh, I'd love to go to Duff's or Council's Kitchen and get a hot pie. So I can make pizza crust, um, but I don't think it makes the best pizza, right? So I decided a while ago I'm going to learn to toss pizza dough, right? It's something I've always admired. It's something I've never tried, and I just kind of decided I was going to start working on it. So I started modulating my pizza dough recipe to come up with a thinner crust. Read a bunch of stuff online, looked at some videos, right? Everybody said make sure your dough is really cold, and I'm actually rising it in the refrigerator, which is new to me. It only rises for an hour, and that's in the refrigerator as opposed to, like 4 hours in a warm place. So I'm not getting that fluffy, bread-like crust. I'm getting a thin crust like you'd expect with a New York style pizza. And I've been modulating the recipe a little bit, playing around with ingredients and trying to find sort of a good mixture, a nice strong gluten that I can toss. But that will still rise, just the right amount. So this is a sort of hodgepodge recipe, and it's yeast based. So we're going to start with a cup of water, and this is going to be enough to make two reasonably sized pizzas. So I'm going to do a cup of really warm water and just a quarter teaspoon of sugar. Now we're not trying to make the dough sweet. The sugar is food for the yeast. And so, in 3 or more cups of flour, you're not going to really taste a quarter teaspoon of sugar, but the yeast will use it to do their metabolism. You need really hot water, and I keep my yeast in the freezer. I'm going to do a cup of yeast, a teaspoon of yeast. Don't do a cup of yeast. And I preheated my tap. So this is just tap water. And I'm doing a cup. It doesn't have to be super precise because we're going to modulate the amount of flour based on how this mixes together. So I'm just going to stir the sugar in there. All right. So here's something else I'm doing that's different. I'm going to take just a teaspoon of yeast, and I'm just going to put it right on top. And I'm not going to mix it in. So I'm just going to just pour it on top and let it kind of sit there. All right, so that's going to proof for a few minutes, and while it's proofing, let me tell you what I know or think I know about yeast. I always like proofing my yeast, even if the formula doesn't call for it. When I started making bread, which was probably about 40 years ago, the guidelines I read said use really hot water from the tap, make it hot enough that you can't keep your hand in it comfortably. So you don't want water that you've heated up in a tea kettle, right? But you want water that's hot enough that, if you tried to hold your hands under a stream of the water for too long, it would get really uncomfortable. It wouldn't burn you, but it would be really, really hot, right? That's where my water comes out if I leave it on the hottest setting. And that seems to be good. Now, I've never actually killed yeast by using water that was too hot. I take that as a good sign. So you can see it's proofing right now. And it's just going to kind of get foamy, and the yeast will dissolve, and it's doing its respiration thing, and that's going to help it turn into a nice pizza crust where the outgassing from the yeast will cause the dough to rise. So I'm going to push my hair out of my way. Hopefully, I don't feel like tying it back. And wash up. I'm going to measure out some flour. So I'm going to do about 3 cups of flour, and then I'm going to keep adding until the dough feels like it's a good consistency. And this is a by feel thing. I got one of these. I got it at Fred Meyer, which is basically Kroger, and it's a pizza paddle, and it's really, really good for putting the pizza into the oven and for taking it out. It's much better than trying to use a spatula. And I'm cooking on a pizza stone. And I also got this from Fred Meyer. These things are impossible to clean, but with a little bit of muscle work, you can scrape off, you know, the burned pieces of crust or cheese or sauce that have accumulated. But you're cooking your pizza, you know, around 500 Fahrenheit. That's going to kill off anything that, you know, might be growing on there. So I've got my pizza paddle out there, and I'm just going to start with some flour. And again, it doesn't have to be super precise because we're going to do this by feel. But I'm going to start off with just about 3 cups of flour in here. So just, you know, no rocket science here. And I'm going to put some flour over here on this paddle and just have that in reserve. Now what I am going to measure is the salt. And the salt is important partially, you know, because you don't want a bland crust, but also the salt interacts with the yeast and controls its growth to some degree. So I'm going to do a half teaspoon of salt, and that I am going to measure just because I don't want like a super salty crust, or I don't want my yeast to go out of control. So I'm going to measure a half teaspoon, and this is all just kind of, you know, biding my time while that yeast is proofing. But let me show you what the yeast looks like right now. Right, so it's getting nice and foamy. Right, so it's definitely alive and doing its thing. All right, I like wooden spoons, so I'm just going to mix the flour and sugar together. Sorry, flour and salt. And here's the deal. So after this is mixed up and after the proof has finished, right, and the yeast has risen a little bit, I'm going to put the yeast and sugar mixture into here, and I'm just going to start mixing it up. And I'm going to keep adding flour until I have a dough that I can actually work with my hands, and then I'm going to knead it. And I'm going to knead it for probably about 5 minutes. And kneading it is stretching the gluten, and when you stretch it, it strengthens it. This is what I was told a long time ago. And when you have strong gluten bonds in your dough, then as the yeast respirates and gives off gases, instead of, you know, breaking through the dough, the gluten bonds capture it and the dough expands. And so you get, you know, a rising action on your bread. All right, so I think this looks pretty good, right? It's definitely alive. If I move it a little, I can see some foam building up on the sides and so on. So I'm just going to give this a quick stir just to make sure I don't have any clumps of yeast. And I'm going to pour that right in. And now I'm going to start mixing this. I don't usually do this in front of a camera, and I don't actually have a camera right now. I have a laptop, so I may be picking pizza dough off my keyboard later. But, you know, mix it together, and if it turns out that I had too much flour in here, I'm just going to add a little more warm water. That's not a big deal. But this is looking like it's going to form a nice dough. I guess I'll just go ahead and put this in the sink. There we go. So normally I have this on the table, but this should work. Alright, so I'm starting to get some consistency here. So I'm going to clean off my spoon. and start shaping this. Now it's a really sticky dough, right? It's sticking to my hands. That's what I want, because I want to add more flour as I'm doing this. And I've got, you know, about a cup of flour next to me, sitting on that pizza paddle. And so I'm doing the same kneading motion. If you've watched my sourdough bread videos, you know what's going on here. So I'll put some more flour in there. So I'm pushing down, folding over, and then turning a quarter of a turn. Push down, fold over, turn a quarter of a turn. And I'm just going to keep doing that. And that action is stretching the protein bonds. I'm not a chemist. I could be making these things up, or more likely reciting things that other people have made up. But it's stretching the gluten bonds, and that's giving you a nice resilient dough that'll do a good job of rising. My sink is squeaking. Hopefully that's not an issue. And I will probably speed up this video in a little bit, because you don't need to watch me knead bread for 5 minutes. But this feels good, right? It's got a good consistency. It's not sticking to my hands, so I like the feel of that. And you know, I have no idea how much flour is in here right now. So you strictly do it by feel. And you know, when I was a kid, my aunt would come and she would make tortillas, and I loved her tortillas. And I would think, you know, I'm going to learn to make those. So one day, as she was making tortillas, every time she got an ingredient and she put it in the bowl, I took it out and I measured it and I wrote it down. And I got the precise formula, right? The Krabby Patty formula for making tortillas. Well, I tried, you know, making them a week later, and they didn't come out anything like hers. Because it's not about, you know, the precise measurements. It's about, you know, putting in flour until your dough feels a certain way, or adjusting your recipe based on what you're trying to do. So if I was trying to make a loaf of French bread, right, I would want more yeast in here, because I want to get that big rising action for a very big, tall loaf. For pizza crust, you know, I'm going to make 2 pizza crusts out of this. So a half a teaspoon of yeast each seems to be a good amount. So you can set a timer, or you can do this until you get bored. My problems when I'm tossing my pizza dough have mainly been that it starts to tear, right? And so I've been working on that. I'm trying to catch it on the edges instead of in the middle, because if you catch it in the middle just gets thinner and thinner, because the sides, you know, fall down under gravity and the stretch happens in the center. So I'm trying to catch it on the edges. But I'm also going to try kneading this a little more and see if I can strengthen the dough. I don't know if that's gonna help, but I've been doing this about 3.5 minutes, so I'm just going to go a little further. Now after this is done, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to cut this in half and shape each half into a nice ball, put them in separate bowls, cover them with saran wrap, put them in the fridge. And the reason is, when I spread this out and start tossing it, I want it to be as symmetric as possible. If you're tossing dough and there's, you know, one side that's a little heavier, that's the side that's going to stretch more. And as it stretches more, the dough near it gets thinner, and it's going to stretch even more. So it's like other things. So I'm going to break this in half and let each one rise separately. Now one of them I'm going to keep in the refrigerator overnight and maybe make another pizza tomorrow. And this one I'm going to make into a pizza tonight, because I'm hungry. So the dough has just changed pretty fundamentally. It feels very smooth to me now. It feels very, the word is silky. I mean, I don't know why pizza dough would feel like silk, but that's the term that comes to mind. It's very smooth, right? And if I poke it, it tends to stay poked. it doesn't come back with my thumb. So I've got a good amount of flour mixed in here, and it's been, about 4.5 minutes. I'm thinking that's probably a good place. So I'm just gonna kind of round this out, and I'm gonna actually go with a knife, because last time I did this by eye with my hands, it ended up pretty uneven. So there's 2 pizzas, and I'm just gonna kind of shape it like this, so I have a nice little round, and I'll do that with the other. I'm also gonna coat these with olive oil, and that's just to keep them from sticking too much to the bowl. They'll stick some, but that's okay. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of olive oil. Put that on my hands and cover one of these. And maybe get a little more. Put that on my hands, cover this other one. And then these are going in the refrigerator. So I'll get a bowl like this, put that in there, cover it up with saran wrap, and we'll let it rise. And it's going to rise at a low temperature. I didn't actually know you could do that. But it's really going to take about an hour, and you're going to be possibly impressed with what this looks like when I take it out in an hour, which will be about 6:15. And I have a fiddle lesson at 7:30, so that's going to give me enough time to make one of these and bake it and eat it. Alright, so there's what we got right now. And we'll put it in the refrigerator for an hour, and we'll be back after that. Alright, so we're back. So it's been about an hour. Let's go ahead and take a look at this dough. And you can see it's risen up quite a bit. So starting to push the top up from the saran wrap. So that's a nice dough. So I'm just going to put some flour on this paddle. I'm going to brush most of it off, but put some of that on there and get some on my hands. And I'm going to take this bowl, and I don't want to collapse this dough too much, so I'm going to pull it out of there pretty gently, and that's a nice dough. So I'm going to put it down, and I'm going to gently begin to spread this out a little bit, and I'm going to spread it kind of from the middle to the edges. And because my goal is to learn to toss dough, I'm going to start tossing this right away. So you can go back and forth hand to hand, and that gets rid of the flour. And I'm just going to start spinning it a little. And if you do this for a living, please don't tell me what a horrible job I'm doing, because I know I'm doing like an amateur job here, but I'm trying to learn. So hopefully if you have some suggestions, I definitely appreciate those. But I've spun it a few times and I haven't dropped it yet on the floor, so that's good. So the best video I saw said start with a fist and a flat hand, and this hand does all the work, and I'm not really conforming to that, but maybe I should. But it's definitely getting bigger, and I'm just going to do this for a little bit. I'm not going to be too perfectionist about it. But this is a whole lot more tossing of the pizza dough than I ever did before last month. And I can see it's starting to get thin in the middle. I'm not going to worry about that too much though, because when it starts to get too thin and it looks like it's going to start tearing through, I'm just going to start spreading it by hand. But, you know, this is an ongoing process. I have the rest of my life to get good at this. That was an unintended flip. But, you know, it's getting there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gears here, and I'm just going to let it stretch under its own weight. And I'm going to go around like this. And in the spots where the crust is thicker, I'm going to let it pull down a little bit more, like that. And it's really thin in the middle, but that's okay, I don't mind that. But I'm going to let more of its weight rest on the paddle so it doesn't stretch too much. And I'm going to concentrate on stretching this outer edge. And, you know, this is all being done by feel at this point. And I don't mind having some thickness around the very edge because that's going to be my crust. But, you know, there we go. We've got a pretty much pizza shape. It's super duper thin in the middle. I'm okay with that. It's going to rise. I'm going to take off some of this flour on the end just so it doesn't end up on the stones. Not a problem if it does. And there's my basic pizza shape. All right, so I'm happy with that. So there you go. So I'm going to get some sauce. And despite being a pizza snob, you know, I use Kroger pizza sauce. I actually like the flavor of it. So I'm just going to throw a bunch down there. And for this I am going to use a metal spoon. Maybe I shouldn't be using metal because, you know, acidic, tomato paste, and metal, maybe not ideal. But I like, you know, having a round shape there. I really wish that I had, like, you know, one of those big ladles that you see when you walk into a pizza parlor and there's the big container of sauce and you just pull out the ladle, put it in there, and then the person does the magic twirl and it spreads out. And I'm not quite there yet, but, you know, I'll get there. So this is all done to taste. I'm feeling like I want a little more sauce tonight than some days. So I'm going to do one more splooch. There we go. And I turned my oven on a few minutes before I started this, but probably not enough. So I might need my oven to get a little warmer. But I'm going to put some mozzarella on top, and I have just kind of moveless, low moisture mozzarella. It's just kind of, you know, inexpensive stuff from the store. I have some fresh mozzarella in the fridge, but I don't think I want to mess with that right now. So I'm just going with, you know, pre-shredded, nothing super fancy. And this is done to taste, and if you have some, like, you know, mini portobello mushrooms or green peppers, or if you're into pepperoni or whatever, you know, obviously you can put toppings on. It's all going to be good. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and put that in the oven. Alright, so to put this in the oven, I'm going to use a spatula to help kind of get it off the paddle. And I'm going to open this up. I'm going to pull this out so that I can get to the stone. So there's that. And, you know, I got a lot of flour on here, so this moves off pretty easily. So I'm just going to put this mostly in the back and kind of push it, coax it onto the stone. There we go. Pop that in and set the timer for about 8 minutes. So it's supposed to cook for 10. I like to check it at 8, see how it looks, and I'll probably leave it in for about, 9 minutes total. Take it out, so I'll be back in a few minutes. Alright, so let's go. It's been a little over 8 minutes. Let's see what we got in here. So it's smelling like pizza. Let's take a look at this. And that's looking like a good pizza. The cheese is starting to turn, and that's probably about as much as I want it. So I'm just going to slide it on the paddle like that. Pull that up there. Close this. And let's see what we got here. There's a pizza. So not too bad, right? Takes about 10 minutes, 15 minutes to mix up, about 10 minutes to toss and put toppings on, and the rest of it is just time waiting for it to rise, waiting for it to cook, things like that. So not a whole lot of labor intensity there. It's going to be really hot, of course, but let's go ahead and cut a piece. Now, you're not supposed to cut on these boards, right? You're supposed to transfer it to a cutting board. I don't have a cutting board yet, so I'm going to cut on here and just assume that my paddle's going to get some scoring to it. But we're going to cut that off and put the cheese back on there. And, we got the good droop there. You can fold it over like a boss, and that's too hot to hold, but that's going to be my dinner now. So anyway, there you go. If I get better at tossing it, I will do a video of just that part of it, and I will try to get the air part so you can actually see it spinning around in the air. And I'm making dough pretty much every day. I may not have pizza every day, but I'm making dough and just experimenting with it. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, that's my pizza making video for now. Thanks for watching. Bye.